Afternoon, everybody. Just briefly, going back to the pie chart, the way it started off with, it was a very small pie initially, and it's a much bigger pie in a much bigger section, a much bigger area for architects. So I think that's a positive to take from that. But working with all these other professionals is fundamental to what we do, isn't it, really, I think? And that's why it's become more complex. And so why was it 22 years ago that Owen Luder stood right here and said that all you guys should become planning supervisors, as was then? And how many of you are now principal designers? Can I have a show of hands? Anybody, your company's taking on principal designer role? 5, 6, 7? Okay, so what have we got? About 100? So we've got 6, 7. So I've got a long way to go here. I do a 2-day course for the RBA. In half an hour, I've got to get this message over to you to give you an attitude to want to take on this role. And it's all about attitude. It's skills, knowledge, experience, but attitude amongst the leaders is fundamental, otherwise nothing happens. So CDM regulations, 94, 2007, 2015, were not intended to tell designers how they should design. But we've been told, so, oh, you've got to design it this way, you've got to design that out, you've got to design this out. Sorry, we're the designers, we're gonna set that pace. So often say, oh, we shouldn't have any working at height, no roof access, no cleaning of windows, no cutting of masonry. Is that right? Or, sorry, it's not quite right, is it? Let's face it. So we don't really want to be dumbing down our design to something perhaps as stark as this. But that is obviously extreme. So all contractors, how they should build. Should we be telling contractors how they should build? I don't think so, and it was never the intention, but we're often told, yeah, you've got to tell them how to put one brick on top of another, so they might injure themselves. No, not ever the intention at all. So, what have we got wrong? I like these two particular slides to show just how fantastic our industry is, and how resourceful, and actually how, in order to build the London Eye, we just shut down half the Thames, built a few pontoons in the middle of the river, and then start building it over the river. Now, it'd be much easier to lay it out on the grass, I think, really probably there, and assemble it and then erect it, but it didn't suit. So that is about understanding risk, tolerability thereof, and integrating it into great design. Whether you like those as great designs doesn't matter. So, how to integrate health and safety into creative design and building. That is what we're looking at here, and I've often been told, couldn't possibly build the Burj Al Arab in England. Why is that then? Oh, far too much roped access. Guys have got to go up there on ropes and deal with it. What about the Spinnaker Tower? Oh no, well they got away with that because it's not a proper building, it's only sort of a pylon. Well, it's got observation panels and so it hasn't got a helipad, but it's much similar sort of thing. But yeah, these guys do go out there. They go out there every day of the week in the North Sea. It's much easier in sort of relatively benign environments. So what is the issues here? So why has health and safety industry been telling us how to design and build for 22 years? Because we've all stood back and actually let them take over and tell us what to do. So I'm looking for you guys to actually take the challenge up, and instead of being presented with these every week, do you get anyone seen one of these? Let's say show of hands. Familiar with these sort of things? And you on a Friday afternoon, oh my God, give it to the office junior. She can fill, or he can fill that in, and we'll send that out, and then it's job done. This is just what the HSE are actually calling an illusion of safety. It's a lot of paperwork and a lot of bureaucracy, but actually is dubious amount of achievement of health and safety. So where do we go from there? We don't want to be seeing checklists, spreadsheets, design risk assessments, risk registers, all sorts. We want to have creative design with health and safety integrated in a creative way. So why have architects left it to planners, supervisors and CDM coordinators? It's all to do with telling granny to suck eggs. Do they really know how to design, or do they just tell us how to suck eggs? So there's all these spreadsheets, there's ways of doing it, and in a way, in fact, we are rather, and perhaps the RBA plan of work is a bit of a, yeah, we've got to do this, tick that one off, do this, and the next stage. Actually, we've got to think about it a bit more intuitively and look in the background of it and understand why we're doing these things. I'm not saying anything against the plan of work, but we mustn't be in our comfort blanket area of just looking at plans of works and other ways of doing things. So, metaphorical example of this, and I think it's a great book to look at, Seeking and Accepting Responsibility at All Levels by M.M. O'Leary. In order to understand how not to suck eggs, we need to learn how to suck eggs. So, egg sucking methodology, egg purchasing, identification, piercing the egg safely, setting down the egg safely, confirming the capability to suck, lifting the egg safely. Then we go to aligning the egg and advice on sucking safely. And this is the most important one. You must remember this one. Sucking the egg, you've got to suck. Okay, so what to do with a mouthful of albumin and yolk? The results of a successful suck and post-egg event evaluation and actions. So I think this kind of quite nicely maps the process of building buildings. So please keep these important messages in mind during the following detailed analysis of the regulations. So, This was the pendulum of safety a few years ago, 94. HSE were very keen to point out that there was too little health and safety going on, and we've got to really up our game. And architects were certainly had their finger pointed very firmly at them. Got to up your game, guys. By the time it came to 2007, there was just frankly too much health and safety, just a plethora of paperwork and bureaucracy, etc., and it's all got out of hand. So the HSE, and we're working with them on Friday as well, and as meetings with them last week, they want to get what they call a proportionate level of health and safety. So you guys aren't scared stiff of actually getting engaged with this. Actually, it's got to be proportionate. But everyone in this room here thinks they're proportionate. So who's right, who's wrong, what is proportionality? There's a misinterpretation, and fear creates myths. The CDM regulations are complex target-setting, non-prescriptive management regulations. So they don't actually give you, like the building regs, an optional, an approved document. Here's a little diagram. It's just target setting. So very widely open to misinterpretation, and conveniently, lots of words have been ignored in the past. And I'll try and explain that to you. And they're all in this kind of purplish sort of colour. So I've got to go through the regulations a bit. General principles of prevention. Who's heard of the principles of prevention? Put your hands up. Anybody? Okay, more, because the last couple of years I've been lecturing to architects, none of you would have heard of it. Today we've got half a dozen, but it's a fundamental plank of the health and safety legislation. But what does it actually mean? And I won't go into that detail today, but it's something you need to look at. But essentially it's avoiding risks, but they've left off where possible. Actually, that's quite important, to know where possible. Evaluate risks. That cannot be avoided. So these are words in the regulations, but what do they mean? Where possible, that cannot be avoided. That doesn't mean we avoid all risks. Put in place proportionate measures to control them at source. So I'm quoting the regulations every time they come up. Okay, so what do we do about that without dumbing down design? We're not looking for ill-considered, overprotective actions, or you can't have sports day today because it's raining at school and this sort of thing, or you can't play conkers in the playground, or you design ill-considered, overprotective actions. So it's not intended. So what are we looking for? And I think this is more of the future, perhaps getting straight into how can we get our issues that are proportionate into a design, into a drawing. So you can actually capture them, be shown to be doing something suitable, and then discussing with the rest of your team, the rest of that pie chart. So key client and designer duties. We're getting into a bit of regulations here, so it's a lot of text. So, client makes suitable arrangements to ensure that the construction work can be carried out so far as is reasonably practicable. Everybody happy with that term? Everybody understand the definition of that, so far as is reasonably practicable? It's quite a complex term, and it's a legal term in the UK, very specific to the UK, but it's fundamental to us to know how, as designers, we've gone as far as we possibly can, without risk to the health and safety of any person affected by the project. So, designers, which obviously includes everyone here, when preparing or modifying a design, the designer must take into account the general principles of prevention, which we discussed, and any pre-construction information to eliminate, that sounds like get rid of entirely, so far as reasonably practicable. Okay, so we don't have to eliminate. How far do we go? Risks to the health and safety of any person. So, if it is not possible to eliminate these risks, the designer must, so far as is reasonably practical, take steps to reduce, or, if that is not possible, control the risk through the subsequent design process. So this is becoming quite an interpretational field that you need to get to grips with. Provide information for those about those risks to the principal designer. So this is, hopefully putting this graphically, what the HSE call a tolerability of risk framework, whereby broadly acceptable risks, green areas, parapets on roofs and platform edge guarding on railways perhaps, and up here there's unacceptable risk, that's no guarding on roofs, and that's people can fall off the edge or whatever. But actually, majority of the stuff we're looking at is what we call tolerable risk. London Eye, Shard, etc. We're looking for this zone. If you're coming down here, cost is increasing massively, arguably, or it's so easy and it can undermine your design. Whereas up the top there, you're looking at having to eat prison food. So somewhere in the middle is what we're looking at. So how do we get there? So principal designer must plan, manage and monitor the pre-construction phase and coordinate matters relating to the health and safety during the pre-construction phase to ensure that, so far as reasonably practicable, the project is carried out without risks to health and safety. These terms are often left out of your client engagement, your contractor engagement documents, because they think, oh, so far as reasonably practicable, we won't put that in, that's just unnecessary. It's fundamental to what you do. In fulfilling the duties, the principal designer must identify and eliminate or control, I won't say it again, foreseeable risks to the health and safety of any person. So foreseeable risk and reasonable practicability. In fulfilling these duties, in paragraph 1, the designer must ensure all designers comply with their duties in Regulation 9. How on earth do we make sure the structural engineer, the service engineer, the master planner comply with their duties? Because we're not in contract with them. We have to cajole them, push them. Can you do a bit more? We need to work this out. And various architects are saying, oh no, we can't possibly do that. We can't take on these duties because of that very, very term. Is this so far as reasonably practicable? It refers back to paragraph 1, as it mentions there. The HSE are very happy to say, yes, it does, and they've confirmed that. But for whatever reason, our industry and our PI insurance arena get very confused about this. It's covered by the qualified term so far as reasonably practicable. So, Gene Venables of the ICE put this together some years ago, and actually I've just added in aesthetics, just because it's about balancing risk and benefit, injury, illness, danger, with time, effort and cost. Architects look at the aesthetics as well, whereas most of the other members of the design team aren't as motivated by aesthetics as we are. So aesthetics in there is a very important part of that balance and getting that to work. But how do you get your team with your client and everybody to get that right balance? If possible, or so far as reasonably practicable, once the risks have been identified, principal designers must follow the approach to managing them set out in the general principles of invention. Must, as far as reasonably practical, ensure that the design team eliminate risks associated with design elements. If this is not possible, for instance, because of competing design considerations such as planning restrictions, specifications, disproportionate costs, or aesthetics, very strongly now mentioned in the CDM regulations, that actually that is a good reason for why you've taken your decisions. Reducing any remaining risks or controlling them to an acceptable level. So what's this acceptable level? This relies on exercising judgment in considering how to manage the risks. The focus should be on those design elements where there is a significant risk of injury or ill health. So, designers and principal designers need to implement SFARP. It's far easier to say than so far as reasonably practicable. And essentially, it is, in essence, it requires weighing the risk against the resources needed to eliminate or reduce the risk. Does that sound easy? You've got to make that decision every time you're in a design team meeting with the rest of your team. And the question whether a measure is or is not reasonably practicable is one which requires no more than the making of a value judgment in the light of all the facts, not just health and safety. You've got to consider all aspects of the project. Health and safety is one component of that. That's why they're asking you guys to do it, rather than a CDMC who only understands health and safety, generally, might have a few other strings to his bow. But you understand the whole picture. So empowerment of the project team to make properly informed project judgments without the fear of prosecution, and I think that's very important, that last bit. You want to be happy that you won't be eating prison food. You've got to be happy that you've done enough and not more than that. But there's lots of different interpretations out there in the industry. We're trying to clarify this and get this into some sort of document. So instead of that huge spreadsheet, actually we've got some CDM analysis going on in your projects, actually analysing how you're going to do things. It's not dissimilar to that spreadsheet globally, but actually it's picking out visually things that we need to take consideration of, comments on how the design can evolve, an action column about reasonableness and tolerability of risk. And if it's in the green area, it's tolerable. If it's in the yellow area, it's acceptable. In the red area, we want to be considering other things. So it's about actions, and rather than just reports, it's about live documents, capturing the key issues as you go along. There's a glossary at the back of the 153, which would have been good at the front, to be honest, because it talks about duties that are absolute. Duty holders must comply with them. And duties that are qualified by terms such as far as practicable or as far as reasonably practicable, the duty holders should comply with them. See the glossary for more detailed explanation. Sorry, this is at the front. So you go to the glossary, then reasonably practicable, balancing the level of risk against the measures needed to control the risk in terms of money, time or trouble. However, you do not need to take action if it would be grossly disproportionate to the level of risk, i.e. tolerable or acceptable. So what is gross disproportionality? Tough one. Significant risks, and this is very important to understand. It's significant if you get your foot cut off, isn't it, to the person who does it. But to a designer, we've got to think about what the significant design risks are. They're not necessarily those that involve the greatest risks, but those including health risks that's not likely to be obvious, are unusual, or likely to be difficult to manage effectively. That's what we should be looking at as a design team or as architects. Not all risks, and trying to resolve every risk on the piece. You'll spend your life doing that. It's an impossibility. So we've got to concentrate on these significant risks. And this is a framework we're trying to work together with the RIBA to kind of to finalise, we're actually saying, look, we want to get our risk down to as low as reasonably practicable, which is another acceptable term. It's not right down here. It's not totally intolerable. Somewhere that's acceptable to the design team, and progressively through the work stages, you're going to be reviewing that and deciding, can you go any further? But because there may be lockdown projects at different work stages, we need to make sure we've done this as early as we possibly can. And if you start re-evaluating that during the job, costs start increasing or risks start increasing. So it's a balance you have to make. But the glossary must is used only where there is an absolute duty, i.e. an explicit legal requirement to take a certain action, which is not qualified with terms such as so far as reasonably practicable. So this is a must. There's an explicit legal requirement, but then it should is used to indicate what to do to comply with legal requirements which are qualified by terms such as so far as reasonably practicable. Unfortunately, when you look at the text, must ensure as far as reasonably practicable occurs in the text, which seems to me to be a bit of a contradiction. It's asking for both, and we need to try and clarify that, but you need to have an understanding of these issues or a confidence to take them on, or take all reasonable steps. So this is about informed common sense and trying to apply what you do generally in your lives into a commercial environment. So creative CDM outcomes are what we're looking for, not just being pressurised to design out all risk. It's about designing in good health and safety. So future leaders and architects need to understand these common sense legal complexities of CDM. It's fundamental we grapple with them. We've ignored them for 22 years. We need to get into control of them. Also an ethical and moral duty as architects, as Wei was mentioning, to manage significant health and safety risks so far as reasonably practicably, whilst creating great architecture and leaving normal routine construction risks to the contractor. We shouldn't be told or telling him how to do his job. And that's got to be something we've got to take on further. So shouldn't be telling other people how to suck eggs, and we shouldn't be told how to suck our eggs. But we need to explain and interpret these issues proportionately on all projects, with all project team members, in the design office with all levels of experience and staff, young and old. And I find certainly in my office it's far harder to convince some of the older guys that they need to change than it is some of the younger guys. But that depends on own attitude and experience as well. So hopefully you can take this back to your office and start thinking about this in a much more philosophical way perhaps. So day to day, whilst designing, at meetings and at conferences like this, being part of that discussion and dialogue. And keeping up to date with the latest thinking, RIBA career learning, which is fundamental to this whole process, to have confidence that you know enough about health and safety to take it on. So create better and safer architecture. We've been doing it since 1425. Those who read Brunelleschi's book, fantastic book about the way CDM in operation, worked in an earthquake zone, and the building hasn't collapsed, but only one person was killed building that dome over 25 years. Fantastic work. We can't emulate that even these days. And we certainly do it on other projects in this country. Thank you very much.
Just to start, if you think about the issue of accessibility or sustainable design, I think as a profession we treat those now as ethical matters. They may have been regulatory initially, but they're ethical. And you mentioned the aesthetic role of the architect, and if you think back to the early days of what was then the DDA Act, etc., we saw some quite heavy-handed solutions to accessibility in buildings, and we now see much more sophisticated approaches to that. So my question is just a bit about why do you think it is that when it comes to health and safety, which feels like it must be at least as an ethical issue as much as anything else, we're so bogged down in perceiving it as a regulatory and compliance issue, and how could we persuade perhaps ourselves in the first instance and then the broader industry that there's a much broader dimension to this, and it's much more central to our professional duty?
I think as professionals or as architects, we want to improve our environment and improve everyone's lot. So actually, if we produce designs which actually somehow encourage deaths or bad health or ill health or long-term latency illness, etc., we've got to consider that. But frankly, we cannot design that all out, and Zaha was very much embroiled in those discussions. And I think she was, unfortunately put in a place which she didn't need to be at that time. We cannot design or change cultural approaches in different countries. Some years ago in this country, it was quite acceptable to kill a few people on a building site. And I heard someone in Birmingham the other day who said, well, it's quite reasonable to kill 59 people, isn't it? He didn't feel it was a big problem. And that was coming from an architect. So I thought, well, okay, that is different people's perception of safety. I've taken on the challenge, but also I want to make it fun, because actually you get so many people who are so serious and are so just take the moral high ground all the time, that it's actually got to be an enjoyable design process and working with safety at the same time.
There's a whole health and safety industry, for want of it, but I know it's perhaps like pejorative way of putting it, but there is this entire industry that's sort of predicated partly on giving the message that architects aren't capable or don't have the competency to deal with these issues. And yet, when you scratch the CDM regulations, most of the most onerous duties actually apply to the designers, so architects have these duties anyway.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering how we can perhaps, again, gain confidence and how then we can demonstrate that we do have the skills, or at least can acquire the skills to enable us to place this role more centrally.
I think it's something we should be taking on. We can, and I've tried to show you the issues that have been missed. Because they were missed, we were spending our time filling in spreadsheets, telling bricklayers and scaffolders how to do their job, which was never the intention. And we've got to kind of get away from that and actually concentrate on the key significant issues, which are generally the transient issues about our designs and our sites. How is the site going to be assembled? Where is the access to site? Things which could actually have an effect on your design. But we do that day to day generally. We've got to take a bit more responsibility than we have perhaps in the past, or that's all contractors' responsibility. No, we need to work with those guys a bit more. There's some very good contractors out there who need your help, and rather than you spend your time doing their risk assessment method statements, which is never intended. And by the way, design risk assessments were never asked for in the regulations, whatever anyone might tell you. You have to analyse and assess risk, which is what we're talking about, and being positive, and I think, in a way, being proactive rather than reactive to reduce design out risks. No, we're designing in tolerable levels of risk into our projects. So it's a creative approach. That's the way we work.
Let's squeeze a question in, if anyone...
Just about this idea of so far as is reasonably practical. If you're the designer and you're doing these drawings and you're rating things yellow, green, red, how is that audited? So if someone comes around in 2 years' time and something's gone wrong and you say, we did it as far as is reasonably practical, and they go, no, you didn't.
Right.
Is there any way of
Yeah. Can I go right from the start? When you said we as designers were doing this, that document is a collaborative document. It's got everybody's names across the bottom there. The whole team that you've actually discussed it with, you talked about it with the rest of your team, and you've come to a conclusion on your project that is so far as reasonably practical for your project. Client's in there as well. He's got to be part of that process. So not that you're hiding behind the mass of other people on your team, but you're making a team-based decision, and other people start saying, well, okay, perhaps have you looked at this? Have you looked at that? Having that discussion is the fundamental to CDM regulation, collaborative working. And all those people in that pie chart need to be part of that process, because they'll all have an input, and certainly services engineers about the plant, structure engineers are doing health and safety all the time. So they need a big input as well into what's going on. And you're not doing it just on your own. And that's what's been the perception in the past, that you've been on a Friday afternoon filling in this sheet and taking all responsibility. Not at all. It's to encourage collaborative working, thinking about just those significant issues. And there might only be half a dozen on a big project. We're trying to clarify down to those major issues. Is it BMU on the roof or roped access, and juggling with those things? It's not this minutiae of health and safety that's been promulgated over the last several years. And going back to the health and safety professionals, unfortunately, they've promoted that approach. They want to look at every minutiae of health and safety. That's contractor stuff. So I don't know if that helps you with so far as reasonably practical. That is the intent of it. What are they going to do? Send the whole design team to prison? Is the ICE's view on this? All go as a team. I think you'll be surprised. It's very unlikely that you could actually stand up in court, say you have made a professional decision and you've recorded it, so it stands the test of time as and when it goes to court, if it has to.